Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back to the Geek Suite. I'm your host and DM for the evening, the one and only Kidner Bean, and after much ado, we're continuing our D&D 5e series, Dungeons & Dragons and Ice and Fire. In this series, we compare Game of Thrones characters to their book counterparts using the Dungeons & Dragons 5e character sheets as our metric of measurement. And for all our new viewers and listeners, be sure to hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all of our latest content. And as we begin every episode of our Dungeons & Dragons and Ice and Fire, I do want to warn all of my lovelies that there is an all-encompassing spoiler warning for both the books and the show. This includes, but is not limited to, bonus features on the DVDs and pre-release chapters of The Winds of Winter. Alrighty, now that we've gotten all the business out of the way, let's get into it. So, once again, we've polled our Patreon patrons and Twitter followers, and the next character that you've all chosen for me to examine is Arya Stark. Now, since I absolutely adore Maisie Williams, we will be starting this comparison episode series by examining her rendition of Arya first. And as per usual, when we start off these metrics, we start with race, because that's usually the easiest. So in the show, Arya is human, as much as the showrunners David and Dan, aka D&D, tried to make her superhuman Wolverine-type character, she is, unfortunately, just human. Sorry, folks. I know. I'm disappointed too. But for her class, we are going to classify her as a rogue, and because this is 5e, there is a special subclass of rogues that is perfect for Arya, the Assassin. You focus your training on the grim art of death. Those who adhere to this archetype are diverse. Hired killers, spies, bounty hunters, and even specially anointed priests trained to exterminate the enemies of their deity. Stealth, poison, and disguise help you eliminate your foes with deadly efficiency. And I mean, if that doesn't describe all of the different facets of the Faceless Men and Arya's interpretation of them to a T, I don't know what does. So I can't think of a better class for her than this assassin rogue archetype. So if anybody disagrees with me or comes up with something better, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. But for now, we're moving on to her background. And her background, much like Jon Snow, the sibling she identifies most with, she has kind of this dual citizenship with backgrounds, one being that of the noble, since she is a Stark, and the other being that of the urchin. So, while she is technically a noble, Arya Stark of Winterfell, she sort of pulls this Toph Beifong thing and rejects high society completely. But she is a Stark of Winterfell, and, like Toph, will use her rank and house name when it is beneficial to her. And she does spend most of seasons 2 and 3 being carted around the Riverlands by the Hound as a high ransom hostage, and this is something that can only really happen to the nobility. However, bringing in the urchin aspect of her background, she did spend a great deal of time after her father's death living as a poor orphan in King's Landing and wouldn't be out of place in the urchin background. Even during her time in Braavos, she spends time as Blind Beth, even though they don't outright say that that's her name. That is the name of her character that we see in the show, given to her in the books. As Blind Beth, she begs on the streets and gains the advantages that urchins do, such as being very familiar with the city streets and being able to move through them more quickly. And we see this not just in Braavos, but also in King's Landing and even Winterfell. In the books, she was called Arya Underfoot, and while we don't hear this nickname of hers in the show, we do see her embody it repeatedly, right off in the pilot episode where she's dodging underneath the various citizens of Winterfell so she can get the best view and then sneak back into the lineup to be presented to the king. We see her dodging around, chasing cats in King's Landing, and we see her doing her ninja parkour through the streets of Braavos after she's been gravely wounded, which, putting a pin in that, we'll get to that when it's appropriate. But yeah, we do actually see that she has a lot of these benefits and archetypes that you see of D&D characters with the urchin background, as well as all of the cliched things that we see with the noble type as well, even though she very much rejects that part of her identity. Alright, so that was a lot for her background. Let's go ahead and move on. So next we're going to be talking about alignment. And as far as alignment goes, Arya Stark in Game of Thrones, the TV show, is kind of all over the place throughout the series. She initially starts out as a hard, lawful good, like all of the Starks, and is completely distraught by the crooked, quote-unquote, court case, Joffrey versus Direwolves, and she doesn't understand why her father allowed the hearing to go the farcical way that it did. She starts out with a rigid sense of morals, of right and wrong, and initially doesn't understand why people break the rules. Now, she, unlike her sister Sansa, learns very quickly how the world really works and adapts accordingly. During her time with the Night's Watchmen, going towards the Wall, and as the Hound's captive, she becomes more lawful neutral and veers towards chaotic good to chaotic neutral. She's fine threatening the fellow orphan boys with death to keep herself safe, and with lying not just about her gender, but her identity and so forth, and how she goes about her world. And she even becomes ambivalent about death, not just with her kill list, which was an idea given to her by Yoren in the Night's Watch. Way to go, Yoren, quality parenting. Which her kill list would be justified in a lawful mindset, as she's only putting people on the list that have committed egregious crimes that we would all agree could be up for death penalty in the states that still allow for that today. But as she veers towards this path of chaotic to neutral to chaotic good, she does things like threaten Jaqen H'ghar in order to get him to kill the guards so that way she and her friends can escape Harrenhal. But on the flip side of that, we do see her still doing things along these same timelines in seasons 2 through 4, where she's okay with killing people to get away, to get what she wants, to further her goals, but she also does things like stop the Hound from killing the meat merchant on the way to the Red Wedding, which the Hound ended up being right about, and the man rats them out to the Lannisters. So we see this sort of dichotomy develop within her where she wants to be lawful, she wants to be good, but she also realizes that within the realm of Westeros and Game of Thrones, that's not necessarily a realistic way to operate, and her actions tend to veer towards more chaotic or chaotic neutral to chaotic good. But she does always try to veer on the side of good, only leaning neutral when she absolutely has to. Now, this is a complete 180 from her character in the last few seasons, particularly when she returns from Braavos. And there are some rumors in the fan community of those who believe that the showrunners, David and Dan, tried to have Arya's character adopt the Lady Stoneheart story arc, which seems very counterproductive to Arya's story arc, particularly in the books, but like I said, we're covering the show today. So she goes full chaos, neutral to evil at this point, because she doesn't really care about what's good, she cares about what she wants. I think in her mind, she still considers herself a good person, and I think the audience would agree for the most part, but for the weird wheel of personalities that she spins at the beginning of each episode, starting in season 7. And I think that the audience would agree that Arya is still a good person because she's using her skills to fight an existential threat that's threatening the entire world. But for that, I don't think that she would be considered, quote-unquote good on the Dungeons & Dragons alignment chart at the end of the series, season 7, season 8. And I think the biggest example of this 180 switch is the quote-unquote trial of Littlefinger. We see Arya in her first experience with a quote-unquote trial that is farcical, in which she believes that if she tells the truth, justice will out, and is completely devastated and offended and outraged by the fact that it is really just a farcical setup by Cersei to get revenge over her son. And we see her go from that to literally setting up her own farcical trial for Littlefinger based on nothing but hearsay, and acting as an instant executioner and feeling completely justified in doing that. Now, sure, Bran saw it all, but nobody is there to verify Bran's powers. Not once since Bran returns to Winterfell has anyone witnessed Bran use his gifts. Summer is dead, Osha is dead, Mira Reed leaves the second they get there, and I think Samwell Tarly says it best and sort of speaks for everyone who encounters with Bran when Bran says, "I'm the three-eyed raven," and Samwell Tarly's like, "Cool. I have no idea what that means." Like, nobody really knows what it means, but Bran's a cripple, he went north of the wall, saw some weird shit, and most importantly, he is a Stark, and more importantly, he is a Stark. Even though Sansa is taking command, they only let Sansa take command because Jon is gone and Bran has abdicated. Bran is the only male Stark heir in Winterfell, so it's more likely than not that everyone's willing to overlook his weird catatonicness and claims to superpowers because he's the Stark of Winterfell, even though Sansa and Jon are taking the reins. So Bran claiming his pseudo powers and using that as an excuse, it really doesn't make sense for anyone in that room to be okay with what is happening, other than letting these kids have a pass because they have been through absolute hell, and Littlefinger was a shit to begin with. Okay. Yeah. So, with all of that out of the way, let's just leave Arya at chaotic neutral, sort of taking her journey and trying to trim away the extremes, because I don't really think that we can consider Season 7 or Season 8 canon, but let's just sort of meet somewhere in the middle and go chaotic neutral for her. She plays by her own rules, but thinks what she's doing is good or just, at least in her mind. And just a reminder from my lovelies, a neutral character does what seems to be a good idea. She doesn't feel strongly one way or the other when it comes to good versus evil or law versus chaos. Most neutral characters exhibit a lack of conviction or bias rather than a commitment to neutrality. Such a character thinks of good as better than evil. After all, she would rather have good neighbors and rulers than evil ones. Still, she's not personally committed to upholding good in any abstract or universal way. And this commitment to neutrality is something that the Faceless Men try to instill in Arya with this death comes for all mantra that they have, but I think her obsession with revenge kind of overshadows this. We also see the following description for neutral characters in D&D Beyond. Neutral is the best alignment you can be because it means you act naturally without prejudice or compulsion. Now, this seems to go almost against Arya's behavior down her path as an assassin. She seems compulsive, like when she kills Meryn Trant in the whorehouse, but because she took the assassin's path at such a young age, this is her acting naturally, without prejudice. At least by the end of the series. She sees death as a natural response to things. Her list, her solution to the Night King, her assessment of Dany at the end of the series with the "I know a killer when I see one." Her moral compass is so out of whack at this point that a chaotic neutral alignment to her is the same as lawful good, and chaotic neutral is probably going to be the best way to describe her. And then we get this last little nugget regarding neutral characters. Neutral can be a dangerous alignment when it represents apathy, indifference, and a lack of conviction. And looking at this, it kind of seems like David and Dan were toying with this idea with all the wild mood swings Arya had in Season 7. She was fun and fighting with Brienne in the yard, and she honors Brienne as someone who's loyal and kept her word to her mother, yada yada yada. But then later in that same episode, she's cold and indifferent and threatening to kill her sister. And then she's not. And then she's happy to see Bran. And then she's cold. And then she's fondly remembering her father as she justifies why she took the warriors or the assassin's path. And then once she got home, and I guess the mentality behind this and why it's dangerous and she's going through this wheel of mood swings and personalities is that once she got home, once she returned to Winterfell, her quote-unquote conviction was gone, and she was unraveling. Up and until she had a mission again in Season 8, killing the Night King, killing Cersei. Alright, we spent an awful lot of time on her alignment, and I know I don't normally do that for characters, but considering the weird and wild journey Arya took, and her alignment went on that journey with her, it sort of felt important to sort of nail this down and explain why I chose what I did. So, now, just looking at what we've got so far, Arya Stark is a human assassin rogue archetype who is chaotic neutral, at least at the end, and has a noble/urchin background. So, given that setup, we're going to select the following skill proficiencies for her. Acrobatics, obviously, athletics, deception, history, persuasion, sleight of hand, and stealth. And I know you're thinking, Kidnerbean, that's kind of a lot. And I would say, yes, you're correct. Typically, most characters only get 4 skills that they're proficient in, but because Arya has the rogue assassin archetype and the urchin/noble background, she gets a couple of extras thrown in. Alrighty, and now that we've gotten the basics like race, class, and alignment out of the way, we're going to go ahead and start using those 5E metrics to see how Arya Stark breaks down. Now, in this series, we do a sort of blending of D&D skill metrics to see where the various skills and abilities level out for our Game of Thrones characters. Normally, when creating a 5e character sheet in D&D, you roll to determine your given abilities and strengths, and then grow as you level up on your journeys and adventures. But for this, we're going to look at evidence from the show to see where these pan out, sort of on an average, since we are covering 8 seasons, and I don't want to pick on people at any single point in the series because these people grow and learn, much like our beloved characters in D&D. So, for those who may be unaware, normally when you're looking at D&D character setup, an average for any given ability is usually at about a 10 with a 0 plus, 14 to 16 being on the high end, and 18 and up being reserved for supernaturally powerful beings. In HBO's Game of Thrones, these would be people like the Night King, the Zombie Mountain, the Dragons, and Bran. And this is where I usually add the joke, and Arya, aka Wolverine, if D&D had their way. And we've finally reached the Arya episode! So, Arya, as written by D&D, being David and Dan, is a supernaturally powerful character in the HBO series. So we are going to see a couple of her skills are going to be maxed out as we go through this breakdown. And now that we reviewed how these abilities are being utilized for our Game of Thrones character D&D sheet, let's see what Arya, aka Maisie Williams, aka Game of Thrones HBO version, looks like. Alrighty, and as always, we start off with strength. And surprisingly, we're going to put Arya in at an 8. Arya is super badass, but she's not really strong. She's a skilled assassin, but she doesn't use strength to kill. She's a water dancer. She's quick and precise. We see in her practice with the Hound that she can't fight strength with strength. She can't escape his grasp when he kidnaps her, or when he takes her out of the Red Wedding. She uses her small stature and speed to kill, not her strength. She is a petite little girl and an actual child for pretty much all of the series. Her small stature and speed is how she defeats Brienne in the training yard. It's how she beats the Night King. And we see in that final scene that she can't break out of his death chokehold. But she uses her snicka rogue skills to defeat him anyway. So, her strength is going in at an 8. And it's, like I mentioned, gonna be one of the few things that's gonna even out this incredibly overpowered fantastical version that HBO has created for Arya. Alrighty, so, strengths out of the way, let's move on to dexterity. As a rogue class, this is gonna be pretty high for her. Watching her parkour through the streets of Braavos and her battle with Brienne, we're gonna have that maxed out at an 18. And speaking of maxed out at an 18, let's move on to Constitution. And one of my favorite memes that came out during the last few seasons of Game of Thrones has to be her Wolverine super strength healing memes, where they compare Jon Snow getting stabbed like 3 to 4 times before dying tragically at the end of season 6, and needing to be brought back using magic by Melisandre. Whereas, similarly, Arya gets stabbed like 1,000,000 times and is way more dramatic, and then dumped in the nasty-ass canals in Braavos, and then is mysteriously healed with soup after crawling her way back to the actress's apartment, before going on her parkour journey and killing the wave less than like 24 hours later. So, yeah, Constitution gets 18. And moving on, let's talk about intelligence and wisdom. And much like we saw for Asha/Yara Greyjoy, these are going to be more developed for her book character than we see in the show. And I think that's just because a lot of the inner depth of these characters were dropped across the board in order to adapt it for screen. But giving that caveat, let's just go ahead and look at her intelligence. We see in the earlier seasons that she's considered to be smarter than girls her age by Tywin, having in-depth knowledge of the Targaryen family history and battle strategy, as well as political allegiances, sigils, and the all-important medieval skill of literacy. But she does have a few moments, especially later on, where she makes really dumb choices. Now, a lot of these dumb choices are heat-of-the-moment choices when emotions are running high, like not putting together in the beginning that Yoren is trying to help her escape as a boy in the Night's Watch immediately after her father is beheaded, or stabbing that soldier after the Red Wedding and putting her and the Hound at risk, or insisting on going to the inn where she and the Hound were outnumbered to get her stupid sword back, or going through a crumbling castle to try and kill Cersei, who was going to die anyway. But given the horrible traumas that she endured, especially at such a young age, I think we can give her a pass. So we're going to leave her intelligence at an average 10. Okie dokie, my lovelies. We've covered intelligence, now let's move on to wisdom. Arya is a fast learner and much more adaptable to the world around her than her sister. But she isn't what I would call wise. She, as I mentioned in the intelligence bit, continually lets her emotions run wild and allows her to make dangerous decisions that the Hound bails her out of at least 3 times. And she is overall clouded by her mission to clear her quote-unquote list. So, given that she hasn't let her stupidity get her killed per se, or rather, she's made sure that the Hound's around to make sure she doesn't get killed, and she does appear to learn some things from her experiences, like not trusting Brienne's Lannister sword when the Hound points it out, and trusting the Hound's judgment. So let's go ahead and leave her at an average 10 for wisdom as well. And that brings us down to our last section, charisma. And again, as a rogue class, she should have mad charisma. But because she's a child assassin hellbent on revenge, she isn't as charismatic as she should be, or as her book counterpart is. She does initially make friends very easily, both in Winterfell and with the other orphan boys on the way to the Wall. But after that, she spends almost all of her time with the Hound, which is a killer on anyone's charisma points. And we see that she doesn't really make friends when she's with the Brotherhood without banners, which she does in the books, as most of them are her father's old bannermen. And we don't really see her make friends in Braavos, but for attempting to befriend the actress that she's initially set out to kill. And we see that, again, in the books, in Braavos, Arya is friends and knows pretty much everyone. And we see that in HBO's Game of Thrones, even the relationships that she did have in the beginning of the series are soured by the end. Her close bond with Jon Snow that we saw at the beginning of the books was essentially gone at the end. She had a more enthusiastic reunion with Bran when he returned to Winterfell than she did when Jon is revealed to be back. She speaks to him maybe like 3 times, and it's always strictly business. No emotion, no inside jokes, no nothing. Gendry, with whom she has a close friendship and sort of budding romantic feelings for in the earlier seasons, is again withered down to a booty call and a rejected marriage proposal by the end of the series. And I'm not saying that book Arya wouldn't have refused to marry out of principle, but she wouldn't have been as cold and indifferent in her interactions with Gendry. Now, that being said, she is still able to laugh and make fast friends with Ed Sheeran and the other Lannister soldiers, but I'm going to chalk that up to Ed Sheeran just being remarkably delightful all around, and has more to do with his charm and charisma than her own. But she does have to be somewhat likable in order for that interaction to be as lighthearted as it is. So, knowing that she can be charming when she wants to be, we'll go ahead and leave her charisma at a 14. High, but not as ridiculously high as a rogue character that's been super powered like hers should be. And speaking of being charming when she wants to be, I hope I can charm you into joining my Patreon family. Patrons are who make this channel possible. Our patrons get access to exclusive Patreon-only content, early access to our videos, access to the Geek Suite Discord server at the higher echelons, and they get to participate in polls for video topics where their votes count twice, not unlike the ones that selected the topic for today's video. Each donation, by month or by video, helps keep this channel going. Details are available on our Patreon page, and the link is here, and a clickable version is in the description section down below. Okay, shameless plugging is over with. Let's move on to armor class and initiative. Now, when we covered these in other episodes, for other characters we've just kind of skimmed over them, but as we've been covering more warrior type classes and characters like Jon and Yara/Asha Greyjoy, and now Arya, we see that they're more important for these types of characters. Now, armor class and initiative are going to be important for an assassin type character like Arya. But Arya's an assassin, not a fighter. And even when she's in battle, like the big battle for Winterfell, we don't see her wearing armor. She's wearing boiled leather, if anything. So that's going to put her in the light armor category and put her AC in at an 11. Now, I've been leaving people's initiatives at a standard 0, but since Arya seems to always be looking for a fight and the first one to jump the gun, I'm going to go and give her a 1. And naturally, since we're dealing with the jetpack super speed level of travel that goes on in the HBO series, we're going to put her speed at infinite power! Now, I know I don't give this speed to all of the characters in the HBO series, but we do see that she gets from Braavos to Westeros and then makes it to the Twins all in about an episode, and then hops back over to the Inn of the Crossroads, which is supposed to be closer to King's Landing, and then back to Winterfell after saying hello to her pet super quick. And, as per usual, now that we've gone through all the basic stuff, let's go ahead and fill out the rest of the sheet, really only sticking to boxes that are most relevant for character comparison for Arya. So, for instance, we'll fill in other proficiencies in languages with things like sailing, since she seems to be very good with that and decides to just see what's west of Westeros at the end of the series. Fighting blind, which is different from the described blind sense ability that assassin rogues get. And in theory, she should know some High Valyrian since she's highborn and spends a lot of time in Braavos, even though we don't really see her use it aside from the Valar Morghulis, Valar Dohaeris bit that the Faceless Men do. So I'm gonna leave that on there and give her the benefit of the doubt. And, ooh, this one's gonna be a long one, you guys. I'm sorry. But I love Arya, so I'm gonna be really, really thorough. And the longest part of this is gonna be looking at the features and traits, which we're gonna start with the noble / urchin / assassin rogue type. So, as per usual, all of our nobles get the feature position of privilege, which states that thanks to your noble birth, people are inclined to think the best of you, yada yada yada, welcome in high society, and feel like you have the right to be wherever you are. Arya definitely feels like she has the right to be wherever she is. I don't know that the common folk make every effort to accommodate her and avoid her displeasure, but other people of high birth do treat her as the same member of the social sphere in that they take her hostage and hold her for ransom. And she can secure an audience with a local noble if she needs to. I don't know that we ever see her really use this feature, but she in theory has it. And then we have the feature for the urchin background, which is called City Secrets, and I touched on this a little bit earlier when discussing why she would be good fit for that background. Urchins know the secret patterns and flow to cities and can find passages through the urban sprawl that others would miss. When you're not in combat, you, and companions you lead, can travel between any two locations in the city twice as fast as your speed would normally allow. And we do see Arya do this a little bit when she's chasing cats and discovering these secret passages in King's Landing in and out of the Red Keep. And in theory, she would be doing this in Bravos as well, because she uses all of these back alleyways and cutting through people's apartments and stuff when she's running from the waif. Alright, moving on to features and traits that you would get as a rogue/assassin. The next ability is based on a real-world linguistic phenomena, because I am a linguist, so you're gonna have a low-key linguistics lesson here in a minute. Thieves' Cant. During your rogue training, you've learned Thieves' Cant, a secret mix of dialect, jargon, and code that allows you to hide messages in seemingly normal conversation. Only another creature that knows Thieves' Cant can understand such messages. It takes 4 times longer to convey such a message than it does to speak the same idea plainly. In addition, you get to understand a secret set of signs and symbols used to convey short, simple messages, such as whether an area is dangerous or the territory is of a thieves' guild, whether loot is nearby, or whether people in the area are easy marks or will provide a safe house for thieves on the run. And now, real-world linguistic education. So, the spoken part of Thieves' Cant is actually based on Cockney rhyming slang, which is essentially just Thieves' Cant. It takes 4 times longer to convey and is a secret mix of dialect, jargon, and code. The way that Cockney rhyming slang worked was that you would take a word at the end of a phrase, delete it, and then insert either a word or phrase that rhymed with it. So for instance, going up the stairs would say going up apples and pears. There were all kinds of crazy phrases that were used commonly. If you want to learn more about it, I'll definitely find a good video and link it in the description section down below. And the second half of this is in reference not to Cockney rhyming slang, but to common graffiti symbols that are used by homeless people and travelers on railroads across America. So they'll leave specific symbols that denote things like whether or not there is a safe house for traveling immigrants nearby or traveling homeless folk, if certain gangs were in control of an area, whether or not there's food or water nearby a certain common jump-off point on these railroads, and things like that. So, the more you know. Okay, so enough of PSAs, back to rogue abilities. The next of which is going to be Cunning Action. Starting at the 2nd level, your quick thinking and agility allow you to move and act more quickly. You can take a bonus action on each of your turns in combat, and this action can be used only to take the dash, disengage, or hide action, which we saw for Asha/Yara. We also have Uncanny Dodge, which starts at the 5th level, where you can use your reaction to have the attack's damage against you when there's an attacker that you can see tries to hit you with an attack. At the 7th level, you get Evasion, which means you can nimbly dodge out of the way for certain area effects, such as Ancient Red Dragon's Fiery Breath or an Ice Storm spell. When you're subjected to an effect that allows you to make a Dexterity saving throw, to take only half damage, you instead take no damage if you succeed on the saving throw, and only half damage if you fail. Reliable Talent, this is mostly just for D&D stuff, where you get to refine your chosen skills and level up. And here we go, Blind Sense. Now, this is something that is unique to the Assassin subclass of the rogue characters, in that starting at the 14th level, if you are able to hear, you are aware of the location of any hidden or invisible creature within 10 feet of you. Now, I say for Arya this is different than her blind fighting style, because she doesn't really use it to see hidden or invisible creatures. She uses it explicitly for combat. Now, Blind Sense, as it's described in D&D, is more or less what they try to teach her as Blind Beth in the books. But as far as using the skill as described, it doesn't quite accurately relay how she goes through the world as Blind Beth in the show, so I'm saying that while she does sort of use this ability in the House of Black and White, she doesn't use the same ability when she's fighting. Okay, and moving on to Infiltration Expertise. Starting at the 9th level, you can unfailingly create false identities for yourself. You must spend 7 days and 25 gold pieces to establish the history, profession, and affiliations for an identity. You can't establish an identity that belongs to someone else. For example, you might acquire appropriate clothing, letters of introduction, and official-looking certification to establish yourself as a member of a trading house from a remote city, so you can insinuate yourself into the company of other wealthy merchants. Thereafter, if you adopt the new identity as a disguise, Other creatures will believe you to be that person until given an obvious reason not to, such as ripping off your face to reveal another face underneath. Sorry guys, I couldn't help myself. Just reading Infiltration Expertise, I'm like, this is exactly what the Faceless Men do, except you can establish an identity that belongs to someone else. You just have to kill said someone else first and take their face. Alright, sort of playing off of that, you have at the 13th level, Imposter, which is like the actual Faceless Men ability, where at the 13th level, you gain the ability to unerringly mimic another person's speech, writing, and behavior. You must spend at least 3 hours studying these 3 components of the person's behavior, listening to their speech, examining their handwriting, and observing mannerisms. Your ruse is indiscernible to the casual observer. If a wary creature suspects something is amiss, you have advantage on any charisma or deception check you make to avoid detection. Whew, okay, so those are all the features that she has as a noble urchin assassin rogue. Now that we've gotten through the bulk, we're looking at her personality traits and see how these D&D breakdowns reflect her character. So the first one I went with is bold. Arya is bold. She's overconfident in her abilities, and then later on as she becomes a superpowered assassin, I guess it would just be appropriately confident. She's willing to fight Thoros and his gang, threatening them in the woods, and then later willing to challenge him in the inn at the crossroads, even though it's pretty obvious she's gonna lose. She never loses this personality trait. She isn't afraid to practice her water dancing against the Hound, even though she's gonna lose. And she tells people exactly what she thinks, which leads into her next personality trait, fearless. Similar to boldness, Arya isn't afraid of anything. She isn't afraid of the Brotherhood, she isn't afraid of the Hound, she isn't afraid of the Mountain, she isn't afraid to die. She isn't afraid when Nymeria's pack finds her and surrounds her. And she isn't afraid to fight the Night King. And the last personality trait that I kind of have for her is hardy. And this is a personality trait that she shared with Yara Greyjoy, which is good for women who need to survive in their non-traditional roles in the world that Game of Thrones creates, but it does have some drawbacks. These people consider themselves strong, and they may judge those who aren't as hardy. The problem is that they can sometimes overestimate their strength and may end up getting hurt as a result. Wow, if that isn't literally just what I said about her 2 personality traits ago. Alright, and we see this problematic version of this trait when she confronts Sansa after finding the letter she was forced to write her mother and brother back in season 1. No, season 2. My apologies. She doesn't think Sansa's defense of, I was forced to write this, is justified, and threatens to tell the others. Which is, again, kind of why I only gave her an average intelligence, because threatening to tell everyone doesn't make any sense. One, they should already know, because a lot of them were there fighting with Robb and then went home after everybody died. And when the original letter was delivered to Robb's war camp, nobody blinked an eye. They read the letter and got the actual message. Sansa is being held hostage. And like I mentioned, okay, so that's her personality, or what they've contrived of it. And let's move on to the last little bits. So for her ideals, we're going to keep this simple. They're family and revenge. She's repeatedly having to decide between finding and helping her family or continuing down her path for revenge. And for bonds, these are going to be people that she has relationships within the show that affect her character growth and decisions that she makes. So, being generous here, I'm going to go with they're her siblings, Nymeria, and the Hound. And as far as flaws, well, her biggest flaw is going to be her Wolverine-esque writing style at the end of the show that was done by the HBO writers, which includes her weird wheel of personalities that she spins before each scene in season 7. It really takes away from the journey that her character took and the relationships that she cultivated and carried with her throughout the show. but I'm going to try to not hold that against her because Maisie Williams did such an amazing job of bringing Arya to life and playing this really complex character for the better part of a decade. So, congratulations. 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 And here you have it. Here is what the HBO/Maisie Williams version of Arya Stark looks like spelled out on paper. Thank you so much for sticking around to see how our ultimate elite assassin turned out. I know this one was a bit of a longer one, so I appreciate you guys sticking with me. Be sure to check back in for part 2 where we look over book Arya and see how they compare. And yes, I am anticipating it to be just as long as this one, because I got a lot to say about my homegirl, Arya. If you liked today's episode, please be sure to hit like and subscribe. It really helps my channel grow, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our episodes as they come available. And be sure to sign up for Patreon to help vote on who we will cover next. That's all the time I got for this evening. Thank you so much, my lovelies, and I will see you all next time. Mwah.